The unwanted visitor. The night was colder than usual. Daniel sat near the small fireplace in his cabin, sipping a hot cup of coffee. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, shaking the walls of his lonely home on this remote colony planet. He liked the quiet. He had come here to escape the noise of crowded human cities, to live in peace. But tonight, something felt different. A loud knock broke the silence. Daniel froze. No one ever visited him. He lived miles away from the nearest colony station. The only people who came here were troublemakers or desperate travelers. He reached for his rifle, resting it against his chair. The knock came again, louder this time. Daniel stood up slowly. His heart pounded in his chest. He moved to the door and peeked through the small window. Someone was outside. The figure stood hunched, shivering. It wasn't human. Its skin was a dark shade of blue, almost black, with faint patterns of glowing silver running down its arms. Its large, slitted eyes stared at the door. An alien. Daniel had seen aliens before. This one was from a species called the Ralvik. They were rare in human colonies, mostly keeping to themselves. He had never spoken to one before, and he had no reason to start now. The alien knocked a third time, weaker this time. "I know you're inside," a voice rasped. It spoke his language, but the words were slow and heavy, as if the cold was making it hard to talk. "Please, let me in." Daniel hesitated. He didn't like strangers, and he especially didn't trust an alien standing at his doorstep in the middle of the night. Then he noticed something. The alien's body was shaking, violently. Its breath came out in thick, white clouds. It was struggling to stay upright. "I will die," the alien whispered, "if you do not help me." Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't want to get involved. But leaving someone, anyone, to freeze to death outside felt wrong. With a sigh, he unlocked the door. The alien stumbled inside, collapsing onto the wooden floor. Daniel quickly shut the door and turned to look at his visitor. Now that it was closer, he could see just how weak it was. Its skin was coated in frost, and its fingers were curled tightly against its chest. Its body was too thin, its breathing ragged. Daniel grabbed a thick blanket and threw it over the alien. "What happened to you?" he asked. The alien's eyes flickered open. It looked at Daniel for a long moment before speaking. "I was exiled." Daniel frowned. "Exiled?" The alien nodded weakly. "My people cast me out, left me in the wild, to die." Daniel didn't like the sound of that. If an entire species wanted nothing to do with one of their own, there had to be a reason. He crossed his arms. "Why?" he asked. The alien hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet Daniel almost didn't hear it, it said, "Because I know something. Something they fear." A chill ran down Daniel's spine, and it wasn't from the cold. He stared at the alien, watching as it pulled the blanket tighter around itself. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, the alien suddenly shuddered. "I need warmth," it gasped. "I won't survive the night without it." Daniel frowned. "You're wrapped in a blanket, and there's a fire. You'll warm up soon enough." The alien shook its head. "No, it's not enough." It looked up at him, desperation in its glowing silver eyes. "I need body heat." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What?" "My species, we do not generate our own warmth," the alien said, its voice trembling. "We take it from others. If I do not sleep beside a warm body, my heart will freeze." Daniel took a step back, gripping his rifle. "No way. That's not happening." The alien's breathing grew weaker. It was struggling to keep its eyes open. "Please," it whispered. Daniel was torn. He didn't trust this creature. He didn't even know if it was telling the truth. What if it was a trap? What if this thing drained him of all his warmth and left him for dead? But at the same time, it really did look like it was dying. If he did nothing, it wouldn't survive the night. Daniel cursed under his breath. He had survived on this harsh planet by following one rule: don't take risks. But this time, he wasn't sure he could turn away. The fire crackled behind him, casting long shadows across the room. The wind howled louder outside. Daniel had a choice to make, and time was running out. A strange condition. The fire crackled in the small wooden cabin, but it barely warmed the room. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls, rattling the windows like a desperate intruder. Daniel sat in his chair, his rifle resting across his lap, eyes locked onto the alien lying on the floor. The creature was wrapped tightly in the thickest blanket he owned, yet it still shivered. It had barely spoken since he let it in, only whispering that it had been exiled and that without warmth it would die. Now, in the dim firelight, the alien's silver eyes flickered open, heavy with exhaustion. Its skin was still coated with frost, and its breathing was slow, too slow. Daniel didn't like this. He didn't like this one bit. I let you in, gave you a blanket. There's a fire, he said, his voice firm. You should be warming up by now. The alien's gaze met his. There was something unsettling in its expression. An urgency, a desperation. It is not enough, it rasped. I need more. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. I already gave you more than I should have, he muttered. You're still breathing. That's good enough. The alien coughed, its whole body shaking. No, it's not. It closed its eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it said, My species, we do not generate our own warmth. Daniel's frown deepened. What? The alien opened its eyes again, and for the first time, he noticed something. Its skin, though dark blue, had a strange quality to it, almost like a smooth living stone. The glowing silver markings along its arms pulsed faintly, like veins carrying dim light instead of blood. We absorb heat, the alien continued, struggling to sit up. From our surroundings, from the sun, from fire, from living beings. Daniel's gut twisted. You mean, you take it from people? The alien's head dipped in a weak nod. That's why I was exiled, it admitted. My kind do not share warmth with outsiders. They only bond with their own, within their groups. I was different. I did not belong. So they cast me out. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You expect me to believe they threw you out just because you were different? The alien hesitated, then looked away. No, it finally said. There is more, but I cannot tell you. A wave of frustration rolled through Daniel. He didn't trust this thing, not one bit. It was hiding something. But what disturbed him most was its request. I need body heat, the alien repeated weakly. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Absolutely not. If I do not share warmth, I will die before morning. A heavy silence settled between them. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Daniel glanced at the alien again. He had already helped more than he should have. But now it wanted to sleep beside him. That wasn't happening. I'm not some heater for you to drain, he snapped. The alien didn't respond at first. Its body trembled harder, its breath growing shallower. Finally, it whispered, I do not drain. I share. Daniel stared at it. What's the difference? The alien's voice was barely audible now. I only take what I need. But I can also give warmth back. Daniel scoffed. And why would I want that? The alien's trembling hand clutched at the blanket. It looked at him with an unreadable expression, something between exhaustion and something deeper, something sad. Because I do not want to die alone. Daniel looked away, cursing under his breath. Why was he even considering this? He was supposed to be alone out here. That was the point of coming to this frozen wasteland of a planet, to get away from people, from problems, from the risks of trusting the wrong person. But this wasn't a person, and it wasn't lying about one thing. It really was dying. Daniel sighed heavily. rubbing his temples. "I'll stay close," he muttered. "But you keep your distance. If I feel anything weird, I'm throwing you outside. Understand?" The alien gave the faintest nod. Daniel didn't like this. Not one bit. But as the storm raged on outside, he had the sinking feeling that letting this creature in was going to change everything. And he wasn't sure if he would live to regret it. Unnatural warmth. The storm outside had not let up. The wind howled through the dense trees, rattling the small cabin as if something outside was trying to get in. But inside, it was eerily silent. Daniel lay on his side on the narrow cot, barely able to sleep. Across the room, on a pile of extra blankets, the alien rested. Its breathing was slow and steady now. Too steady, almost unnatural. He had let it stay. He had allowed it close. But something about the whole situation made his skin crawl. His body still felt cold, even though the fire was still burning. And that wasn't right. Daniel frowned, shifting under the covers. His limbs felt stiff, not frozen exactly, but off. His fingers tingled slightly, and there was a strange sensation in his chest, like his warmth had been drained just a little too much. His eyes flickered toward the alien. It wasn't shivering anymore. In fact, it looked perfectly fine now. Its dark blue skin, which had been icy and covered in frost hours ago, was now smooth, almost sleek, and the silver lines running along its arms pulsed faintly, as if something inside was active. Daniel sat up slowly. The movement must have woken the alien, because its silver eyes slid open instantly, glowing faintly in the dim light. "You're awake," the alien murmured, its voice soft and strangely calm. Daniel ignored the eerie way it had spoken and rubbed his arms. He still felt cold, even though the cabin was warm. "I don't feel right," he muttered. The alien sat up too, studying him carefully. "You are alive. That is what matters." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "That's not an answer." The alien tilted its head slightly. "You are not used to sharing warmth," it said. "Your body has lost some heat, but I only took what I needed." Daniel scowled. "Yeah, well, I didn't agree to that." The alien's silver eyes darkened slightly. "You let me stay. You knew what I needed." Daniel felt a sharp wave of irritation rise in his chest. "That doesn't mean I agreed to be your personal heater," he shot back. "You said you shared warmth, not just took it." "I did." The words were simple, but something about the way the alien said them made Daniel uneasy. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. He wasn't in immediate danger. At least he thought he wasn't, but something was still bothering him. The alien had been nearly frozen to death when it arrived. Now it looked stronger, much stronger. Its posture was no longer weak and shivering. Its breathing was deep and even. And Daniel felt worse. His skin was clammy, his body sluggish. He didn't feel like he was dying. But something was off. Something wasn't normal. Daniel exhaled sharply, pushing himself to his feet. "All right," he muttered. "This isn't working. You're better now. You need to go." The alien blinked at him. "I cannot leave." Daniel's fingers twitched toward his rifle, still resting near the bed. "The hell you can't," he said, voice cold. The alien's glowing silver eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Daniel saw something behind them. Something calculating. Not aggressive, not threatening, but not entirely helpless either. "You do not understand what is out there," the alien murmured. Daniel frowned. "The storm. Yeah, I get it. It's bad. But it'll pass. You can survive." The alien didn't move. "I was not talking about the storm." A heavy silence filled the room. The fire crackled in the background, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had let this thing in because it had been dying. But now it wasn't dying. Now it was fine. And yet, it refused to leave. Something was wrong. Daniel took a step toward his rifle, keeping his eyes on the alien. "Start talking," he said, his voice sharp. "What aren't you telling me?" The alien didn't flinch, but its eyes shifted slightly, as if weighing something. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it said, "They will come for me." Daniel froze. His hand hovered near his weapon, but he didn't pick it up yet. His heart pounded in his chest, and a slow, creeping dread curled in his stomach. "They," he repeated. The alien's glowing eyes didn't blink. "My people, and the thing that hunts them." The fire popped loudly, but neither of them moved. Daniel felt his pulse thudding in his ears. "Explain." The alien exhaled slowly, then glanced toward the door, as if expecting something, or someone, to be outside. "I was not just exiled," it murmured. "I escaped." Daniel's grip tightened around his rifle. Escaped from what? The alien looked back at him, its glowing silver eyes filled with something Daniel hadn't expected. Fear. From the very beginning, this thing had been desperate, desperate to survive, desperate to be let in, but not just because of the cold. Something else had been chasing it. Something worse. Daniel swallowed hard. "How long do we have?" The alien's gaze flickered toward the window, then back to him. "I do not know," it whispered. "But the cold is not the only thing outside." A deep, sinking feeling settled in Daniel's gut. This was bad. This was really bad. And he wasn't sure if letting the alien inside had saved his life, or sealed his fate. Hunted by more than the cold, the wind outside was no longer just howling. It was screaming. Daniel had lived through storms before. Bad ones, the kind that could tear roofs off buildings and bury entire stations under snow. But this wasn't just a storm. This was something else. He could feel it in his bones. Inside the small cabin, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows along the wooden walls. The alien sat on the floor, its silver eyes locked onto the door. It hadn't moved much since their last conversation, but Daniel could see the tension in its posture, the way its hands were clenched into tight fists. It was listening. So was Daniel. The wind was loud, but beneath it, he could hear something else, something distant, something wrong. A deep rhythmic sound, like breathing. But no living thing could be that big. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "Start talking," he muttered. "Right now." The alien didn't turn its gaze from the door. "They will come," it said softly. "And when they do, you will understand." Daniel's patience was running thin. "Who?" he demanded. "Your people, the ones who exiled you." The alien hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, and also something worse." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man who jumped at shadows. He had lived alone for years, surviving in the harsh wilderness of this colony planet. He had faced off against predators, storms, and even raiders. But something about the way the alien said something worse made his skin crawl. "Explain," he said, voice low. The alien finally turned to face him. Its silver eyes flickered, as if struggling to find the right words. "My kind fear warmth," it began. "Not because we do not need it, but because it makes us vulnerable." Daniel frowned. Vulnerable to what? The alien's throat moved as it swallowed. To it. A sharp gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the walls. Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. "What the hell is it?" The alien exhaled slowly. "A predator." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "That thing outside?" he asked. The alien nodded. "It hunts warmth. It follows the heat signatures of living things. The more warmth you have, the easier it finds you." Daniel's breath hitched. "And your kind, you absorb heat." The alien gave a slight nod. "Yes." The realization hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "That means, the warmer you are, the more it wants you." The alien's expression darkened. "Yes." Daniel swore under his breath. He had brought this thing inside. Let it warm up. made it a beacon, a loud, glowing target. His fingers itched against the rifle. "You didn't tell me this before," he said. "Why?" The alien's expression was unreadable. "Would you have let me in if I had?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "No." A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the rhythmic breathing sound grew louder, closer. Daniel moved toward the window, keeping his body low. He pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to look outside. At first he saw nothing but swirling snow. The wind whipped it in all directions, making it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. Then something moved, a shape shifting just beyond the tree line. Daniel's breath caught. It was massive, a towering, shifting form, its body almost blending with the storm. But it wasn't just mist or snow. It had weight, a presence that bent the air around it. And its movements weren't random. It was searching, hunting. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too fragile. Daniel let the curtain drop back into place and turned sharply toward the alien. "Can it break through walls?" he asked. The alien's expression was grim. "It does not need to." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" The alien stood slowly, its silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "It seeps," it murmured. "It finds the smallest openings. It spreads into the cracks. And once it is inside, it drains everything." Daniel's mind raced. He had reinforced this cabin himself. No major openings, no weak points. But it wasn't built to keep out something that could seep. His gaze flickered to the fireplace, then the door. It hunted heat. Daniel cursed. "We need to kill the fire." The alien nodded. Now, Daniel moved fast. He grabbed a metal bucket, scooping up dirt from the floorboard's cracks, and dumped it over the flames. The fire hissed and sputtered, shrinking into glowing embers before vanishing into darkness. The cabin instantly grew colder. Daniel felt the temperature drop sharply, his breath turning to mist in front of him. But he ignored the discomfort and grabbed his rifle again, turning back to the alien. "What now?" The alien was completely still. "We wait." Daniel hated that answer, but he didn't have a better one. Outside, the breathing sound grew even closer. Then, a single click. Daniel stiffened. His heart slammed against his ribs. That sound hadn't come from the storm. It had come from inside the cabin. The alien's silver eyes flickered toward the shadows in the far corner of the room. Daniel followed its gaze. His blood ran cold. The darkness in the corner. It was moving. Slowly, stretching upward like curling fingers of smoke. Something was already inside. And it had been watching them the whole time. The predator approaches. A single breath. That was all it took for Daniel to realize he was no longer in control of the situation. The fire was out. The cabin was plunged into cold darkness, and yet the shadows were moving, stretching, curling unnaturally in the farthest corner of the room. Something was already inside. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter, his body rigid, his instincts screaming at him to move. But where? If the thing could seep through cracks, if it could twist its way through the very air, there was no escape. The alien beside him remained still, its silver eyes locked onto the shifting darkness. "Don't breathe," it whispered. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay quiet. The shadow in the corner rippled. The clicking sound returned, soft, rhythmic. Not footsteps, not an animal's growl. Something worse. Something thinking. Then came the whisper. A voice that wasn't a voice. A sound that slithered into his ears without traveling through the air. It wasn't something spoken aloud. It was something felt. Daniel's spine stiffened. His skin crawled. The shadow thickened, shifting into something that almost resembled a shape. Long fingers tapering into wisps of nothing. A torso that flickered like mist. And then, eyes. No, not eyes. Two deep voids. Empty sockets that seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. Daniel's breath hitched. The air was growing colder by the second. His fingers were already numb against his rifle. The alien beside him exhaled slowly. It knows we are here. No kidding. Daniel gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to pull the trigger. Shooting the shadow. That was a great way to waste ammo. He had to think, fast. The alien turned toward him. Its voice was barely audible. You must run. Daniel shot it a look. Run where? The forest, the alien whispered. It is open. It cannot spread as easily there. Daniel's stomach clenched. So instead of being trapped in here with it, you want me to run into a storm. The alien's silver eyes glowed faintly. Do you have a better option? Daniel didn't. Another click echoed through the room, closer this time. The shadow creature moved, its long fingers extending toward the floor, reaching toward them. Daniel made his decision. Go. He moved first, shoving open the cabin door. A blast of freezing wind slammed into him, stealing the breath from his lungs. Snow whipped through the air like needles, but he forced himself forward. The alien followed, moving fast despite the brutal cold. Behind them, the whisper returned. Tulu Arimth here. Daniel didn't turn back. He didn't need to. He could feel the thing moving, slipping toward them, stretching like black fog against the white snow. His boots pounded against the frozen ground. Trees loomed ahead, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The alien suddenly grabbed his arm. This way. Daniel barely had time to react before the creature yanked him hard, dragging him toward a narrow path between the trees. The storm raged, howling like a living thing, but the further they ran, the thinner the air felt. Too thin. Daniel staggered, gasping. His lungs burned, his skin tingled. The cold was no longer just cold, it was leaching his strength. The alien cursed. It is pulling the heat from us. Daniel forced his legs to keep moving. Then what's the plan? The alien hesitated for only a second. We need fire. Daniel nearly laughed, half out of exhaustion, half out of sheer disbelief. Fire? You just told me to put the damn fire out back there. The alien's silver eyes flashed. I was keeping us alive then. Now we must fight. Daniel swore under his breath. Fine. Fire. He reached for his belt, fumbling for his emergency flare. His hands were stiff, nearly useless from the cold, but he managed to grip it. Cover me, he shouted. The alien didn't hesitate. It spun on its heel, raising both hands. The silver lines along its arms pulsed brightly, brighter than before. For the first time, Daniel realized the alien was radiating heat, like a beacon. The shadow thing lunged. Daniel yanked the cap off the flare and struck it against the rough patch on its side. FWOSH. A burst of red-orange light exploded into the darkness, illuminating the snow-covered ground. The effect was instant. The shadow reeled back. A piercing, unnatural screech tore through the night. The air vibrated with it, a sound so raw and unnatural it made Daniel's skull throb. The creature twisted violently, its form breaking apart like ink dispersing in water. Daniel gritted his teeth and took a step forward, thrusting the flare toward it. You want warmth, he growled. Come and get it. The alien watched, its expression unreadable. But Daniel caught something in its eyes, something like approval. The creature hesitated. It writhed, shifting erratically. It wanted to move forward, to consume the warmth. But the fire was deadly to it. Daniel's pulse pounded. His breath steamed in the frozen air. He wasn't sure how long the flare would last. He wasn't sure if the thing would leave or just wait. But for the first time since this nightmare started, he had a weapon. The alien stepped closer to him, voice low. We must find something bigger to burn. Daniel exhaled sharply, his hands still trembling. Like what? The alien didn't answer right away. It turned, scanning the dark forest. Its silver eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then it whispered, I know a place. Daniel shot it a wary glance. And let me guess, it's not close. The alien's lips curled slightly, almost like a smile. Not close. Not safe. Daniel let out a slow breath. Figures. He glanced at the writhing shadow in the snow, still lurking at the edge of the flare's light. Then he looked back at the alien. "Well," he muttered, "lead the way." And with that, they ran. Fire and ice. The flare burned bright in Daniel's hand, its flickering red-orange glow casting jagged shadows against the snow. The shadow creature coiled at the edge of the light, its amorphous tendrils twisting unnaturally, waiting. Daniel didn't wait. "Move," he shouted, gripping his rifle with his free hand as he ran after the alien. The cold bit deep, even through his thick coat. His muscles ached, his fingers felt numb, and every breath came out in a painful gasp. But they couldn't stop. Not now. Not with that thing hunting them. The alien moved quickly, navigating through the forest with an eerie sense of direction. Its silver eyes flickered with determination. Daniel caught up, still gripping the flare like a lifeline. "This place we're going. What is it?" The alien didn't slow. "A ruin. Old, abandoned. My people left it long ago." Daniel's stomach twisted. "And we're running toward it. Why?" "Because," the alien said, glancing back, "it still burns." Daniel almost stopped mid-stride. "What?" The alien leaped over a fallen log, its voice steady despite the freezing air. "There is something inside. Something that burns forever." Daniel gritted his teeth. "You're gonna have to be more specific than that." The alien's expression was unreadable. "I will show you." Another inhuman screech tore through the air. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder. The shadow was still there, following them. But now it was shifting, stretching along the snow like ink bleeding through paper. It didn't just move. It spread. Daniel cursed under his breath. "We're running out of time." The alien didn't respond. It just ran faster. The ruins of fire. After what felt like forever, the trees thinned, revealing a jagged outcrop of stone. Daniel's boots crunched against the ice as he followed the alien up a steep incline. Then he saw it, an ancient structure, half buried in snow. Thick blackened stones formed a wide circular ruin, walls crumbling, pillars broken. But the strangest part, at the center, a faint orange glow pulsed from deep within the ground. Heat. Real, tangible heat. Daniel's breath hitched. His frozen skin tingled as the warmth reached him, cutting through the icy wind. The alien stepped forward, silver eyes reflecting the glow. "This is what we need." Daniel frowned, glancing at the glowing fissure in the stone. "And what exactly is it?" The alien hesitated. "It is old. From the first ones. My people built around it. But they did not create it." Daniel's patience was running thin. "So it's a fire, a power source." The alien looked at him. "It is alive." A shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Behind them, the whispering sound returned. The shadow was closing in. Daniel tightened his grip on the flare. "Whatever it is, tell me it can kill that thing." The alien's gaze didn't waver. "Yes." That was all Daniel needed to hear. The last stand. The shadow creature surged forward, tendrils snaking through the air like liquid darkness. The temperature dropped so fast, Daniel could feel the heat being sucked from his body. The alien took a slow breath, stepping closer to the glowing fissure. Its silver markings pulsed. Daniel didn't like whatever it was about to do. But at this point, he didn't have a choice. "Tell me what to do," he muttered, leveling his rifle. The alien placed a hand over the fissure. Its voice was calm. "Feed the fire." Daniel scowled. "What does that mean?" The alien exhaled. "Give it something to burn." The words barely left its mouth before the shadow lunged. Daniel fired. The gunshot rang out in the frozen night, the bullet striking the shifting darkness. But it passed through like mist, disappearing into nothing. The shadow screamed. Daniel barely had time to react before tendrils lashed out. He ducked, rolling to the side as the flare in his hand flickered wildly. The alien didn't move. It stood still, both hands pressed against the glowing fissure. And then, the fire moved. Daniel watched, wide-eyed, as the pulsing orange light spread outward, flowing toward the alien's hands like molten gold. The silver lines on its arms pulsed, absorbing the glow. Then the alien turned to face the shadow. It lifted one hand. Fire ignited in its palm. Daniel's breath caught. What the hell? The alien's voice was barely above a whisper. Run. Daniel didn't argue. He scrambled backward as the alien threw the fire. The glowing flames struck the shadow like liquid sunlight. The creature shrieked, its entire form convulsing. The moment the fire touched it, it didn't just burn. It collapsed, its body unraveling like smoke in the wind. Daniel shielded his eyes as the ruin exploded with heat. The air shimmered. The snow melted in an instant. The world went bright. And then, silence. Daniel blinked, his vision adjusting to the sudden stillness. The shadow was gone. The alien stood at the edge of the fissure, its silver eyes dimmer than before, its body swaying slightly. Daniel took a cautious step forward. Is it? The alien exhaled. Dead. Daniel let out a slow breath, lowering his rifle. His hands were still shaking. It was over. A new fire. The storm had lessened. The wind had died down. And yet, the warmth from the fissure remained, spreading outward like an unseen force. Daniel turned to the alien, studying it carefully. What the hell was that? He finally asked. The alien's expression was unreadable. I told you. It was old, and it was waiting. Daniel didn't like that answer. He glanced back at the fissure, the ever-burning glow within. Something told him this wasn't just fire. This was something else, something bigger, something dangerous. But for now, it had saved them. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. So what now? The alien hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, it said, I cannot go back to my people. Daniel looked at it. Why? The alien's silver eyes met his. Because now, I am something else. Daniel frowned, glancing at the strange fire once more. He wasn't sure what the alien had done, but he had the sinking feeling that whatever happened next, he wasn't going to like it. A new alliance. The ruins still smoldered. Daniel stood at the edge of the glowing fissure, staring at the unnatural fire that pulsed beneath the broken stone. The storm had quieted, the wind no longer howling through the trees. The night was still, too still. The predator was dead. The battle was over. But something told him this was far from finished. Behind him, the alien stood motionless. Its silver eyes, once dim, now flickered with an eerie glow. Its dark blue skin had taken on a strange warmth, and the silver markings on its arms pulsed faintly, as if something inside it had changed. Daniel turned, gripping his rifle tightly. What the hell happened to you? The alien exhaled slowly. I survived. Daniel narrowed his eyes. That's not an answer. The alien stepped closer to the fissure, looking down at the endless fire within. It extended a hand toward the heat, and for a moment, Daniel swore the flames reached back, like something alive inside the fire recognized it. I took from it, the alien admitted, its voice quiet. And it took from me. Daniel's stomach twisted. What does that mean? The alien turned to face him. I am not the same as I was. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. He had spent years living in isolation, away from the chaos of human colonies, away from anything that could drag him into problems that weren't his. And yet here he was. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped forward, his voice sharp. You gonna be a problem for me? The alien tilted its head. No. Daniel studied it carefully. He had seen the raw power it unleashed in the fight. He had watched it wield fire like it was part of its own body. Before, it had been weak. desperate. Now it was something else. Something stronger. Something unknown. Daniel exhaled, lowering his rifle just slightly. So what now? The alien turned its gaze back to the fire. My people will come, it said. Daniel frowned. You said they exiled you. They did. The alien's voice was unreadable. But they will not ignore this place. They will feel the fire. They will come to destroy it. Daniel glanced at the smoldering ruins, unease curling in his gut. And that's a problem because the alien finally looked back at him. Because it is not meant to be destroyed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. You're telling me they exiled you, left you to die, but now they're going to chase after you anyway. The alien nodded. They fear what I have become. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, I can see why. The air between them grew heavier. There was no more immediate danger, no more shadow creatures lurking in the dark. And yet Daniel had the gut feeling that things were far from over. The alien watched him closely. You could leave. Daniel frowned. Excuse me. You came here to be alone, the alien said simply. You could go back to that. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had come to this frozen world to escape, to build a quiet, simple life where no one expected anything from him. But now, standing here, watching the glow of an ancient fire and listening to an alien outcast talk about what came next, he realized something. If he walked away now, he'd be running forever. Something deep in his gut told him that if he left, this thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop with just this one hunt. It was bigger than him now. Daniel exhaled sharply. Nah, he muttered. I don't like loose ends. The alien studied him. Then, for the first time, it did something unexpected. It smiled. Not a full human smile, just a small, subtle shift of expression. And somehow, that made Daniel even more uneasy. He sighed, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. All right, he muttered. So, if we're doing this, if we're stopping your people from messing with this fire, his eyes met the alien's. We're gonna need a plan. The alien nodded. Then let's make one. Daniel looked back at the smoldering ruins, the warmth from the fire still pressing against his skin. He had no idea what he'd just gotten himself into. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to be cold anymore. And he sure as hell wasn't going to be alone.